Good afternoon and thank you for joining us here at The Ambassador, where we debunk global diplomacy and geopolitics. I am your ambassador, Susan Nganga. Today, we will be shifting our focus on the current complex relationship between Sudan and Kenya, following Sudan's decision to suspend all trade with Kenya, a move that came after the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan announced the formation of a parallel government, a political shift that has caused significant disruption in bilateral trade, particularly in Kenya's tea exports. This will be our focus today on our African in-depth segment. You wouldn't want to miss the discussions. But first, here are the top stories making headlines. Thousands of people gathered on Copacabana Beach to show their support for former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who is facing serious charges related to an alleged plot to destabilize Brazil's democracy. He, along with key allies, is set to face a 5-judge panel at Brazil's Supreme Court later this month, where they could stand trial for their roles in an alleged scheme to overthrow the government. Here is more on that report.
Thousands of supporters of former Brazilian President Bolsonaro gathered on the Copacabana beach to demonstrate their support for him as he faces serious charges related to an alleged plot to undermine Brazil's democracy. Bolsonaro, alongside key allies, will go before a 5-judge panel at Brazil's Supreme Court on March 25th, where he will be tried for organizing a criminal group to destabilize the government. The charges also include an alleged plot to poison his successor, President Luiz, which Bolsonaro and his defense team deny the accusations, asserting that he never supported any efforts to dismantle Brazil's democratic institutions.
What is this code that I have to prove that I didn't do? It should be the opposite. They should prove that I tried. I will be a problem for them, whether I'm jailed or dead. But I keep the Brazilian people's hope of liberation alive.
The rally also focused on demanding a pardon for Bolsonaro's supporters who participated in the January 8th riots, during which government buildings were attacked. Bolsonaro, despite being banned from running for office until 2030, is pushing for amnesty for those involved, claiming they were innocent. Analysts suggest that these public demonstrations are an attempt to maintain his political influence as he faces legal charges, including a Supreme Court ruling and an electoral ban. While his illegal battle is expected to be difficult, Bolsonaro is looking to the streets to reaffirm his leadership and bolster support for a potential 2026 presidential run. Teresa Tiengo, GBS News.
We'll keep you more updated on that report as it develops. Now, the United States and Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen are both vowing escalation after the United States launched airstrikes to deter the rebels from attacking military and commercial vessels on one of the world's busiest shipping corridors. The Houthi-run Health Ministry said the United States strikes killed at least 53 people, including 5 women and 2 children, and wounded almost 100 in the capital of Sana'a and other provinces, including Saada, the rebel stronghold on the border with Saudi Arabia. President Donald Trump on Saturday vowed the use of overwhelming lethal force until the Houthis cease their attacks and warned that any Tehran will be held fully accountable for their actions. The Houthis have repeatedly targeting shipping in the Red Sea, sinking 2 vessels in what they call acts of solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza, where Israel has been at war with Hamas, another Iranian ally. The attacks stopped on an Israeli-Hamas ceasefire took hold in January, a day before Trump took office. But last week, the Houthis say they will renew their attacks against Israeli vessels after Israel cut off the flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza this month. In a speech aired Sunday night, the rebels' secretive leader Abdul Malik warned, and I quote, "We will confront escalation with escalation," end of quote.
We will respond to the American enemy in its raids, in its attacks, with missile strikes, by targeting its aircraft carriers, its warships, its ships, However, we also still have escalations option. If it continues its aggression, we'll move to the additional escalations options.
Now, the legal challenges have emerged over the Trump's administration deportation efforts, with a federal judge temporarily blocking the removal of immigrants to El Salvador. Despite the ruling, flights carrying detainees were already in the air. The case centers on the use of a 1790A wartime law to deport individuals linked to a Venezuelan gang. Here's more on that.
The Trump administration is facing legal charges after continuing deportations of immigrants to El Salvador, even as a federal judge temporarily blocked the removals. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg issued the order, halting the deportation of Venezuelan nationals under the Trump administration's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1978. The law allows the president to remove foreign nationals in extraordinary circumstances. However, by the time the ruling was issued, 2 planes carrying the immigrants were already in the air. Though the judge verbally instructed the planes to be turned around, his written order did not include that directive, making it unclear whether the administration was defying the court's decision. The deportations were part of a broader effort targeting members of the Venezuelan gang, which President Trump called an invasion of the United States. The administration has not provided evidence that the deported individuals were gang members or had committed crimes in the United States. Legal charges filed by immigration lawyers on behalf of the deported individuals argue that the law was being misused to remove people without proper due process. The judge's ruling temporarily blocks further deportations, allowing immigrants to remain in federal custody until a hearing scheduled for Friday. Teresa Tiengo, GBS News.
Russia has laid out their demands for a peace deal with Ukraine. Russia has stated that Ukraine should be excluded from joining NATO. Furthermore, Russia has also demanded that Ukraine should have a neutral stance in the global stage. This comes after Ukraine agreed to a 30-day ceasefire proposal that will limit air and sea combats between the two warring nations. Furthermore, United States President Donald Trump plans to call on Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss the ceasefire proposal. Here's more on that scene.
For a week, Russia's willingness to accept peace has been tested by the international community. Ukraine has agreed to a 30-day ceasefire proposal that will pause air and sea combats as a way to give room to formulate a long-term peace treaty. However, Russia included a list of demands that will guarantee Ukraine's security. Russia has stated that Ukraine should be excluded from joining NATO. Furthermore, Russia stated that NATO peacekeeping troops should not be allowed in Ukraine. Instead, they are open to unarmed conflict observers. US President Donald Trump is expected to call Russian President Vladimir Putin tomorrow to discuss the ceasefire proposal and the territories under Russian occupation.
I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday, and a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance. We'll be talking about land, we'll be talking about power plants, because that's up, it's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
Meanwhile, Russia and Ukraine continue to launch missile and drone attacks that have caused mass casualties and the destruction of property, with Ukrainian officials warning their citizens of more drone attacks to be unleashed by Russia. As the situation between Russia and Ukraine escalates, the question remains: what compromises must Russia and Ukraine make in order for the peace deal to materialize? How will Trump respond to Putin's demand? Only time will tell. This is Abdihamid Ali, GBS News.
The United States has vowed to continue its airstrikes against Yemen's Houthi militias until they cease their attacks on shifting vessels in the Red Sea. The warning comes after deadly United States airstrikes in Yemen, which resulted in the deaths of at least 53 people, making it the largest United States military operation in the Middle East since President Donald Trump assumed office. The Houthis have threatened to escalate their actions in retaliation, targeting United States ships if the U.S. continues with the airstrikes. Here's more on that scene.
During the weekend, the U.S. launched military attacks on Yemen, which resulted in the death of 53 people. This campaign follows airstrikes on Houthi-controlled areas. The Pentagon, however, has not yet verified the claims of civilian casualties. In response, the Houthis have vowed to continue the escalation, with Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi declaring that their fighters will target U.S. ships in the Red Sea, citing ongoing U.S. military actions in Yemen. The Houthis have stated that Israel should end its blockade on military aid that has affected more than 2 million inhabitants in Gaza. Otherwise, goods that are traveling to Israel via the Red Sea will be targeted. The Houthis' attack on global shipping have disrupted key maritime routes, raising concerns about international trade and stability. Meanwhile, Trump has pledged to defend its interests in the critical waterways, which are vital for global commerce. Trump has also emphasized the role of Iran in enabling the Houthis, warning Iran to stop funding the group. The ongoing conflict in Yemen and the larger geopolitical ramifications of the Houthi-US standoff highlight a grim reality for international trade. The repeated attacks on shipping lanes and military targets emphasize the fragility of international trade and the security of crucial maritime routes. The involvement of external powers, especially Iran, further complicates the path to peace, leaving the fate of Yemen and its people hanging in the balance. This is Abdi Hamid Ali, GBS News.
That report takes us to a very fast break. We'll be back for the next segment of the African In-Depth, where we analyze the current tensions between Sudan and Kenya.
Are you all happy to see me? Yes, I'm also very happy to see you. We're going to make, ta-da, a banana milk package. Now we're done with the banana milk package. How is it for you as a parent? Are you having an adolescent? How is parenting for you?
But again, we have to be fair, firm, and friendly. We cannot parent without being friendly to these children. Peer pressure not to be pure. Where the adolescents, they have a slogan, Mavajonifara. Parents, you have to be hot, raw, real, and nice.
How do we help our children to understand we are not from the West and we can never be the West? The reason as to why I'm bringing this out is because
we have to understand the trends. Because they tend to trade with what is trading. We have to be able to understand and tell our children, just because it is trading doesn't make it a trade.
But let's continue this conversation online across all our social media networks. That's GBS TV Africa. Our SMS line is 21144.
What is always before you but can't be seen?
Kudiscover talent au
Kudiscover ulijuangaje like unaweza imba like yeah.
Kini Trace Jumi Kipchoge kwa ngoma na mfala wananidis na wanabonga kwa ngoma, mafanjo ananipenda ndo nazidi kwa roga, wenye walenjaribu mazee walishachoka na nikozabe meditation naendelesha generation niliofanya kalki.
Wewe at 1 year old ulikuwa unafanya nini? You're feeling the vibe. Ulitoa a few days ago, unaweza taka utuambie like ulikuwa unafikiria nini when you came up with the lyrics? Yeah.
So I'm doing my thing. Don't try and stop me when I'm doing my thing. I'm tryna boss, let me do my thing. And if you're tryna win, you can be on my team. Yeah, so I'm doing my thing. Don't try and stop me when I'm doing my thing. I'm tryna boss, let me do my thing.
You feel like you're young at heart, I'm an old soul. If you could only listen to one singer or band for the rest of your life, who will you choose?
Yeah, because we are here to entertain and educate at the same time. So the question of the day, have you ever benefited from any youth-led initiative?
What pushed me to get into the ground, one, was born HIV positive, by the way. So when I was born HIV positive, I felt like the society and the youth need to be educated much on about the HIV and HIV management.
Someone was confessing and alikuwa anasema like yeye ako HIV positive, ni student, but yeye badala ya ajue venye atasaidia wengine, yana try venye atasambaza.
Unajua pia kitu kingine yenye natusumbua sisi mayouth ni kiburi. You don't want to learn, unaona?
Yeah.
Be there to learn. My youth are doing things that they are not supposed to do. Kwa sababu anataka kitu yenye iko beyond yeye. Iko beyond haezi afford. Unaona? Manze mimi nataka kubamba wase kuchafua meza, kukuwa na dem sijui mwenye anakaje. Ndio at least wase wa feel like mimi nimeweza. Manze mimi hiyo ya kuweza, acha tuweze ki mindset. Na pia uset goals. Kama una goals manze kwa hii life sijui penye. Ni kama tu yani you should live with a purpose, not in purpose. Unajua most of us are living in purpose. Whereby yani wewe uko tu manze. Hata unataka kukatia dema na kwambia habari yako mzuri. Unadoingi nini ati mimi niko tu. What is mimi niko?
What is always before you but can't be seen?
Kudiscover talent au
Kudiscover ulijuangaje like unaweza imba like yeah.
Kini Trace Jumi Kipchoge kwa ngoma na mfala wananidis na wanabonga kwa ngoma, mafanjo ananipenda ndo nazidi kwa roga, wenye walenjaribu mazee walishachoka na nikozabe meditation naendelesha generation niliofanya kalki.
Wewe at 1 year old ulikuwa unafanya nini? You're feeling the vibe. Ulitoa a few days ago, unaweza taka utuambie like ulikuwa unafikiria nini when you came up with the lyrics? Yeah.
So I'm doing my thing. Don't try and stop me when I'm doing my thing. I'm tryna boss, let me do my thing. And if you're tryna win, you can be on my team. Yeah, so I'm doing my thing. Don't try and stop me when I'm doing my thing. I'm trying to boss, let me do my thing.
You feel like you're young at heart, I'm an old soul. If you could only listen to one singer or band for the rest of your life, who will you choose?
Yeah, because we are here to entertain and educate at the same time. So the question of the day, have you ever benefited from any youth-led initiative?
What pushed me to get into the ground, one, was born HIV positive, by the way. So when I was born HIV positive, I felt like the society and the youth need to be educated much on about the HIV and HIV management.
Someone was confessing and alikuwa anasema like yeye ako HIV positive, ni student, but yeye badala ya ajue venye atasaidia wengine, yeye ana try venye atasambaza.
Unajua pia kitu kingine yenye natusumbua sisi mayouth ni kiburi. You don't want to learn. Unaona?
Yeah.
Be there to learn. My youth are doing things that they are not supposed to do. Kwa sababu anataka kitu yenye iko beyond yeye. Iko beyond haezi afford. Unaona? Manze mimi nataka kubamba wase kuchafua meza, kukuwa na dem sijui mwenye anakaaje. Ndio at least wase wa feel like mimi nimeweza. Manze mimi hiyo ya kuweza, acha tuweze ki mindset. Na pia uset goals. Kama una goals manze kwa hii life sijui penye. Ni kama tu yani you should live with a purpose, not in purpose. Unajua most of us are living in purpose whereby yani wewe uko tu manze. Hata unataka kukatia dema na kuambia habari yako mzuri. Unadoingi nini ati mimi niko tu. What is mimi niko?
Everywhere, GBS.
Welcome back now. Today's discussion on African In-Depth will explore the complex relationship between Kenya and Sudan, which has recently deteriorated, marked by Sudan's imposition of an import ban on Kenyan goods. This action stems from Sudan's accusations that Kenya is supporting the Rapid Support Forces, a rival function in the ongoing Sudanese conflict. We'll be joined by Dr. Josh Mayo, an expert in international relations, and Peris Kigo, our correspondent. But first, let's take a listen to Peris Kigo's report on the African In-Depth.
Sudan has suspended all imports from Kenya in protest after the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces who are fighting in the army in a 2-year civil war were hosted in Nairobi.
All these teas will not be able to be shipped out of Mombasa due to this ban. So it is going to have serious negative economic impacts to the tea trade, not just in Kenya alone, but mostly in Kenya, because Kenya controls 80% of the teas traded through the port of Mombasa.
Last month, the Rapid Support Forces and its allied political and armed groups signed a founding charter in Kenya expressing the intention to form a parallel government in Sudan.
The way Sudan is today, it is very ugly for whoever is looking in from the outside. No society can be formed or exist like this. But from today, from this gathering here, moving forward, we want to have a fundamental solution.
Sudan's military government said the import ban was to preserve the country's sovereignty and protect its national security. The war-torn country imports several products from Kenya, including tea, food items, and pharmaceutical products. A decree was issued by Sudan Ministry of Trade. It ordered all relevant authorities to enforce the ban immediately. Tensions between Kenya and Sudan have been escalating for several months. Kenyan President William Ruto has faced widespread criticism at home for his perceived close ties with the Rapid Support Forces. Last month, Sudan recalled its ambassador to Kenya in protest against Nairobi involvement in a conspiracy to establish a government for the Rapid Support Forces. Sudan called Kenya's hosting of the Rapid Support Forces meetings tantamount of an act of hostility. But Kenya defended its rule, stating that hosting the meeting was part of efforts to find solutions to end the war in Sudan without any ulterior motives. Both countries have traditionally enjoyed strong trade relations, with Kenya being an important partner for Sudan, particularly in agriculture and manufacturing. Kenya exports a range of goods to Sudan, with tea being its most significant export, followed by coffee, tobacco, and other products such as soaps, electrical equipment, and pharmaceuticals. Tea is one of the Kenya's most significant foreign exchange earners, and this move is expected to disrupt both trade flows and broader economy. Economist Ken Gichinga said this ban will be a big blow, and foreign exchange will take a hit. Sudan is one of the top 5 destinations for Kenya tea, and producers are worried about the effects of the ban. The East African Tea Trade Association expressed concern over ongoing contracts and shipments stuck in transit.
Now, on that, I'll invite our guests first to introduce themselves on the show. We'll start with you, Dr. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me once again.
Yes.
My name is Dr. Josh Mayo. I teach international relations at USIU Africa.
Thank you. Paris?
My name is Paris Kigo. I'm a GBS TV correspondent. Issue about Africa geopolitics.
Paris, you have seen the ongoing tensions between Sudan and Kenya.
Yes.
Take us through it.
So recently we have seen the trade suspension that have been done. And the reason why we have seen this trade suspension is because of the Rapid Support Forces, Kenya hosting the Rapid Support Forces. And we know when we look at the history of the Rapid Support Forces, we know the credential of the Rapid Support Forces are tainted. There are people who are wanted in war crime by the International Criminal Court. And we wonder why the government of Kenya hosted the Rapid Support Forces in our country. Where did they come to declare a parallel government in our own country? And when you look at the word parallel government is a political structure that opposes or challenges the official government. So the Rapid Support Forces are forming a political structure that is opposing the Sudan government. And you know the Sudan government is led by Hamdan Dagalo. So this issue of trade suspension, the Sudan government has seen Kenyan nation as a threat, because Kenya are siding the Rapid Support Forces. Although they have tried to justify themselves, they have said that it's a kind of unity. They were trying to bring unity in Sudan, but they're not bringing unity, because we can see the Rapid Support Forces want to create their own government to rule. So we wonder, what kind of unity are they bringing? So that is what have led to this suspension. So in fact, they should not say Kenyans. They should say the government of Kenya, because it's not Kenya who are involved, it is the government of Kenya. And Kenya did not know. We even heard suddenly that the Rapid Support Forces and the allied groups are in Kenya, signing a political charter to form a parallel government. So you see, it is creating a diplomatic tensions between Kenya and Sudan. And that's why we can see we are reaping the consequences of the trade suspension.
Exactly. What's your take on that?
No, I totally agree with what Paris has said. Perhaps I can add with a historical context of the role that Kenya has played in regional conflicts around the Eastern Horn of Africa. Going back to the 1990s with the collapse of Somalia, for instance, we notice that Kenya has been what is known as a safe haven when there is conflict across the countries in the region. Even President Museveni, remember, he came to power in the 1980s as a rebel leader, right? And he used to live in Nairobi together with his family. And whenever he needed to take a break from the conflict, he would come to Nairobi. The same thing with some of the major warlords from Somalia. Ethiopia was a hostile country at the time because there was a conflict in Ethiopia, there was a communist regime, there was a civil war in Ethiopia. So many of them actually sought sanctuary in Kenya. The same thing with the long history of the conflict in South Sudan, where John Garang was a friend of President Moi. He was a host. He had a home in Kenya, and his family lived here, and so on and so forth. Even as far as the war conflict in Rwanda, in Burundi, and even the Democratic Republic of Congo, many of the actors in those conflicts have been based in Kenya. And so I think that the current government in Kenya thought that it is playing the same role, playing host. But the problem is that Kenya forgets, or at least the current government forgets, that when it played host to, for instance, South Sudan's John Garang, and some of the warlords from Somalia, and even some of the factions in the conflict in Rwanda and in Uganda, these persons who are given sanctuary in Kenya also enjoyed support from the United States. And as long as any faction has support from the United States, mostly the entire world, at least the Western world, lines up behind that. And this was, and so there was no opposition also from the African Union, right? Because they tended to support the sides that were supported by the major power, which is the US. In this particular case, the situation is different. The US has decided that it's a disinterested party in the Sudan conflict. That is one thing. Two, there is the involvement of other actors. In the absence of the leadership role of the US, other actors fill the vacuum. So we have more than 14 countries involved in the conflict in Sudan. But somehow, majority of the powerful countries seem to be supporting the government forces. Yes. And a minority of countries, particularly not very powerful countries, except the United Arab Emirates, are supporting the RSF. And so Kenya seems to be aligning itself with the weaker party in this conflict. So that is the context in which we understand that the dynamics, the global dynamics are different. The side that Kenya is aligning with is not the dominant side. So Kenya is in a disadvantaged position in terms of geopolitics, and strategically, some have said that it is a disastrous move. It is a miscalculation on the part of the Kenyan government to side itself with RSF. But of course, there are other more personal interests that explain Kenya's, or at least the government's support and alignment with RSF.
Can Kenya go back to its word? Like, can it?
Unfortunately, we need to see this also in the context of how Kenya has played its diplomatic cards in the recent past. Mm-hmm. Kenya allowed the capture and expulsion of the Ugandan opposition leader, Besigye, who is now in military detention. He's in hunger strike. And he has no free and fair trial in Uganda. And Kenya facilitated his abduction and expatriation. Yes. There was a recent abduction and expatriation of Turkish opposition figures from Kenya. So Kenya has been seen to be doing one diplomatic blunder after another. And Kenya was not known for this before. Kenya was a sanctuary for dissident figures. Besigye was treated in Kenya several times when he was brutally assaulted by the Ugandan regime. Even regionally, we saw the abduction of a Tanzanian blogger, journalist, the other day. So Kenya is, the Kenyan government in the recent past has committed one diplomatic blunder after another. It has also not played cards very well in terms of the conflict in the DRC. That is why the Kenyan troops were expelled out of Congo after a few months of peacekeeping. And Kenya is said to be, in relation to the conflict in South Sudan, is playing the same role that Rwanda is playing in the DRC conflict. It is becoming a conduit for illicit minerals. Hemedti, the leader of the RSF, has enriched himself and is able to finance the conflict because he is in control of gold mining, large deposits of gold mining in Western Sudan. The major country that has been buying the gold from Western Sudan is the United Arab Emirates. Some of this gold is going through Kenya, allegedly. And at the beginning of the conflict in 2003, the president of Kenya hosted Hemedti at State House, which clearly showed Kenya was partisan. So it is not an objective and unbiased actor in this conflict. From the very beginning, I think Kenya showed its hand that it was biased in the conflict.
Doctor, you are saying that Kenya are disadvantaged because they have aligned with weaker group, the Rapid Support Force. Actually, are we supposed to tell them they are a weaker group or they are a corrupt group? Because we can see by the kind of the reputation the Rapid Support Forces have is very bad, because they have been involved with the atrocity, the killing, and the rapes. And they are not allegations. They are something that they have been even approved by the United Nations Security Council. So do you think that Kenya are disadvantaged because they have been involved themselves with a weaker group, that is the Rapid Support Forces, or they're disadvantaged because they have involved themselves with a criminal group?
You're very right. You have raised a very critical issue of human rights violations and atrocities. But before I come to that, conflict is about power. First and foremost, it is about power.
Okay.
And then secondly, issues of human rights and justice have become secondary, unfortunately, in terms of international relations. Conflict is primarily about power. We are seeing the same thing that's happening in the conflict in Ukraine. The current American president is supporting Russia and is supporting Vladimir Putin, going against the traditional position of the West and even previous US administrations that supported the Ukrainian government. Russia has committed massive atrocities, abductions, killing and civilians, and so on and so forth. But the US is supporting Russia because they are geopolitical, economic, and power interests. So countries and actors make calculations because of their personal interests. And so it is, however, it is true that the RSF has committed these atrocities, but the government side is also not blame-free. It has also committed atrocities on his side, trying to expel the RSF from the regions that it has controlled. So in the Sudanese conflict, there is no side that is that has clean hands. Let's put it that way. The only issue is that the RSF is seen as a rebel organization that is challenging the legitimate authority of the government side. But remember that the chief of the government side, who is a military general, was the president. Hemedti was the deputy. So technically speaking, they were co-principals in the government before that. But Hemedti, because he supported a kind of a militia, right? He's seen not to be the legitimate force. So it's also a question of legitimacy rather than atrocities. Which one is the more legitimate actor between the two? The other one is perceived to be the government forces, the legitimate forces of the government, and this one is a militia.
Okay,
so there's that distinction as well.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be back shortly after this.
All right. You know,
Are you all happy to see
what
me?
is true leadership? Okay, the leadership.
Yes, I'm also very happy to see you. We're going to make, ta-da, a banana milk package. Now we're done with the banana milk package.
So
How is it for you as a parent? Are you having an adolescent? How is parenting for you?
But again, we have to be fair, firm, and friendly. We cannot parent without being friendly to these children. It's peer pressure not to be pure. Where the adolescents, they have a slogan, Mavajuni Fara. Parents, you have to be hot, raw, real, and nice.
How do we help our children to understand we are not from the West and we can never be the West? The reason as to why I'm bringing this out is because
we have to understand the trends. Because they tend to trade with what is trading. We have to be able to understand and tell our children, just because it is trading doesn't make it a trade.
But let's continue this conversation online across all our social media networks. That's GBS TV Africa. Our SMS line is 21144.
Everywhere, GBS.
Welcome back to the bulletin. You are discussing about the ongoing tensions between Sudan and Kenya. Peres was raising a very serious question to Daktari.
Yeah.
Peres, take it on.
Okay, I was asking Daktari, Daktari, what is true leadership? Because you have said about power. It's all about power. So that means for these leaders to gain power, they have to go through committing atrocities. And you know, these people, the same people they want to rule are the same people that they are killing. Like in Sudan, the rapid support forces want to rule Sudan. They want to form a government. Which people are they going to rule in Sudan if they have displaced 12 million people? They have killed thousands of people in Sudan. So I'm asking, what is true leadership? You want leadership, but you don't have the skills of leadership. You are committing atrocity. You are killing the same people you want to rule. You are killing them, committing atrocity. So what is true leadership? Do they want the leadership or they want power? Because the people that they want to rule, they are killing them.
Okay.
Yeah, they are committing atrocity, raping people. So we want to ask, what is the true leadership? Do this leader want to rule the people or they want power? Because they go to an extra of killing people for them to gain power. So I'm asking Daktari, what is the meaning of true leadership?
Okay, that's an interesting question you have asked, which is very philosophical. In a situation such as we have in Sudan, I think that the warring general will say that we are not targeting civilians. The argument is that we are targeting the strategic positions of the opponent forces. They argue in every conflict situation, you will hear that civilian casualties are unintended consequences. They are not the primary targets of the conflict, of the strike. And they will argue that in some cases, the civilians themselves flee the path of the conflict so that they can be safe. Some of them will also argue that we facilitate the safe passage of civilians so that they are out of harm's way. So I think in a conflict situation, it's much more complex than simply saying that the combatant parties are directly targeting civilians. There is no military advantage with directly targeting the civilians unless the other side is using civilians as a cover, right? As if their civilians are hostages as a cover so that when the other side strikes these strategic positions, the civilians suffer, therefore the other side looks bad. So conflict is very messy. The same argument was used by Israel in targeting civilian positions in the Gaza conflict. They argue that Hamas is actually using civilian and civilian institutions as a shield. For example, putting their strategic weapons in schools, in hospitals, and such places. So Israel then argues that it is actually targeting military targets, but it happens that civilians, these targets are placed in civilian places. So every situation is complex, and so it is not very easy to simply say that they are targeting civilians. And we also have to understand that both war is not a precise science, right? When missiles are fired at enemy positions, there is not 100% precision. it is usually with an error of a certain percentage. So the degree of sophistication of technology minimizes that you have stray ammunition that lands elsewhere. But when you have a brutal conflict such as in Sudan, where both sides are using very old technology, very old weapons, the likelihood is that there is no precision. And a lot of the fighting is happening in urban areas. Remember that Sudan is a semi-desert country, so most civilians live in urban areas. The urbanization in Sudan is probably about 60%. So most people live in cities, and this is where the conflicts are taking place. So when you have cities where there is high concentration of civilians, the civilian casualties will definitely be high. So it's quite a complex situation.
Paris has very strong opinions about that.
No,
We have
Doctor,
to counter him.
I'm asking, is it right? Like, is it right for the two warring parties to target civilians, or maybe the civilians to be victims of the two parties who are struggling for power? Is it right, Doctor?
So I think as commentators about conflict and politics in Africa, of course we can give opinions about right and wrong. But I think the purpose of analysis is not really to pass judgment for us, but to try to understand what is happening, what is the nature of the conflict, what are the dynamics of the conflict, what are the developments in the conflict, and what are the likely outcome of the conflict. So it is not for us really to pass judgment about right and wrong, because then we are verging on issues of opinion and ethics and all that, which is a bit of a strange place to go as far as conflict analysis is concerned.
Dr. Iris, Sudan has now started a trade war between us and them. Could this lead to any regional instability in terms of economics?
So for now, this is limited, this is bilateral between Sudan and Kenya.
Yes.
So that's important. So it has no immediate regional dimension to it. And Kenya is already back channeling under the radar, trying to resolve the situation. We need to understand that Sudan is not a major trading partner with Kenya. Even for the commodity that we're exporting, which is tea and tobacco, Sudan is not a major outlet for our teas. Our teas mostly go to Pakistan and other countries in the Middle East.
So you're not on the losing side?
So, of course, for the individual traders, you have a trader who has purchased tea. They have an agreement with a buyer in Sudan. You've spent millions of Kenyan shillings to. Some of the teas is already in the high seas. It is on the ships in the high seas. Some of them have already docked at the port. Some of them have been purchased. They are at warehouses in Mombasa. So for the individual traders, they are suffering. Kenya, in terms of the total value, the latest figures we have from 2023, when the conflict started, is that the total volume of trade between Kenya and of goods we were selling to Sudan was about $50 million per year, which is not a lot compared to the overall volume of trade that Kenya trades externally. But for individual traders, it's a lot. So I think as a country, you know, Kenya is, or at least the leadership of Kenya is making calculations. It is not a 0 or 100%. You make calculation, what can we afford? Maybe a few traders will lose, but maybe there is a bigger strategic target that Kenya seeks to achieve. But in this particular case, a lot of commentators and observers said that there is no direct strategic gain that Kenya as a country gets by aligning itself with RSF. Some have argued that this is these are personal interests, personal relationships between the head of state and the head of the RSF, because primarily of the gold that is mined in Sudan, in western parts of Sudan, and perhaps there are personal friendships or personal benefits, but there is strategically, under whatever view you want to, whatever perspective you want to look, there is absolutely no strategic gain for Kenya in aligning itself with either side of the conflict. Sudan is a minor country. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. It's not a major trading partner. We don't buy anything of significance. The total value of goods we buy from Sudan is about 5 million in a year. right? Alcohol is the biggest import we buy from Sudan. So it's an insignificant country. It is an insignificant conflict for us to meddle in, and we have nothing to gain by aligning on either side. Essentially, we end up losing because we look bad as a country. The African Union has come out clearly and said that we reject any attempt to form a parallel government in South Sudan. In Sudan, why do I keep saying South Sudan? Because it's our closest neighbor, and when we think of Sudan, we think about South Sudan.
Yes.
But anyway, the point is that the African Union has clearly put down its position. It is against the support of any parallel government. I think the African Union perceives the RSF as an illegitimate force. The African Union recognizes the Sudanese armed forces as the legitimate actor in this conflict. The African Union is trying to pursue a path of peace building and conflict resolution that does not favor either side, and definitely a path that does not lead to the division of Sudan. The argument by many commentators is that the position that Kenya has taken to support the RSF, which has declared a parallel government and a charter for a government, is basically leading to the division of Sudan to two states. Basically, Hemedti and the RSF want to control West Sudan, particularly the Darfur region, and probably create a separate state. That is why they are creating a separate political institutional framework. I think Hemedti is probably making a calculation that they are not winning the war. They have lost Khartoum, they have lost the neighboring major cities, Omdurman and the others around Khartoum, so they don't have control of majority of the country. The armed forces are on the ascendancy. They are receiving a lot of sophisticated weaponry from their partners. They are pushing the RSF to the corner. So the RSF wants to, I think, create an enclave and then declare a separatist state. And Kenya is perceived to be facilitating that, which is against the Charter of the African Union, that no state should support any elements that lead to division of states. Kenya is looking, whichever way you want to look at it, Kenya has made a strategic blunder, and I think it should consider walking back the position that it has taken, so that Kenya profiles itself as a leading country in Africa. When you're a leading country in Africa, you want to lead, put your ear to the ground and follow consensus, right? What is the African consensus? You read the room, as they say. Where is Africa leaning on this conflict? And you align with the majority of states. Currently, it's not doing that.
But Dr. you said the trade war is not impacting anything. Sudan is not giving us anything. So why should we retract back on our word?
Because of our diplomatic standing on the African continent. We have nothing to gain by supporting either side. We have nothing to gain by supporting RSF. Our traders are losing. We are losing face on the African continent. We are supporting a separatist movement. So we need to pedal back in order to gain favor and save face on the African continent. Already we've damaged ourselves with the Besigye affair, with the Turkish affair, with the DRC affair. We've lost in the race for the African Union position that Raila was. So we are not in a very powerful strategic position. And I think Kenya needs to step back, cool the heels, and really rethink our position on the African continent going forward.
But will it make an impact? Because as you've already said, we already have lost face in the African continent. Could retracting back on the Sudan affair make us good again, if I may see?
Nothing is permanent.
Yes.
Yes. In diplomacy, any losses can be made up, and I think and people forget. So given time and making the right strategic decisions going forward, Kenya can mend fences and regains its standing of respect on the African continent.
Doctor, you have seen Kenya is not gaining or losing anything supporting either side, either the Rapid Support Force or whichever. But what about our image, Doctor, the image of or the reputation of our country? Because to me, I see there is an effect. Because, you know, the Rapid Support Forces, when you look at their history, they don't have a good history at all. We know. So when you say there's no effect, for me, I see there's a very great effect about our country in terms of even diplomatic relations. So Kenya going to engage with the Rapid Support Forces, we know, like globally, many nations saw what happened, Sudan and Kenya. Nationwide or globally, millions of nations were watching. I mean, they were watching what what Kenya were doing with the Rapid Support Forces, allowing the Rapid Support Forces to come to Kenya and sign that agreement. So you can see the reputation of the Rapid Support Forces is also tainting our image as our country. It's tainting it. So it will have an effect. It's tainting our image because the Rapid Support Forces credentials are corrupt. So when you engage with a country which is corrupt, you also become corrupt.
Yes, you're quite right. Actually, the argument that I'm making is that Kenya has nothing to gain by meddling in that conflict or choosing sides. The argument is that we have more to lose by aligning on one side, particularly aligning with RSF. So you're very right, and I totally agree with you that we have a lot to lose, right? And we have nothing to gain by aligning. So that is why we need to relook at our strategic position and the choices that we have made in relation to the Sudan conflict and try to mend fences and align ourselves with the broader sentiment on the African continent.
Yeah, at least that one.
Yes,
But now you're there.
Any other questions?
Yeah? No.
Okay. With that, we conclude our bulletin today. Remember, here at Ambassador Willy Bank Global Diplomacy and Geopolitics. Good afternoon.
Everywhere, GBS.